I will now call to order the City of Portage Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, September 8th, 2021. If you would stand and say the pledge with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Monroe, could you call roll?
Yes, I can. Austin Mata.
Here.
Tom Cherry.
Here.
Carrie Gunning. Gina Geis-Hurst.
Here.
Hortensia Moreno.
Here.
Charles Thompson.
Here.
Luke Weidman. Kevin Witherspoon. Denise Little.
Here. Has everybody had an opportunity to look at the minutes? And if there are no changes or correction, may I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Would you be able to?
I'll second.
Okay.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any reports of the officers or committees?
I don't have that this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
I do not.
Okay. If you could go ahead and call the new business for our first item of business.
Yes, C0221, James McKeamy, Harold Attorney, Karen Italian, 35 Aspen Road, Ogden Dunes, Indiana, requesting to change the zoning from R2, low-density residential, to C1, small to medium, general commercial, at 6441 Melton Road.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. This is a petition for a partial zoning change because actually what we have here are two parcels along Route 20. The front biggest portion of the parcels are zoned commercial, but in approximately 2005, when they did the rezone for Portage, they took an imaginary line, if you would, along the back 75 feet of all of these lots along Melton Road and zoned them R2. So what we have are, as I said, two parcels. You may know this property if you're old enough to remember. It used to be Portage Rentals, and then it became Northern Transmissions, and it's been commercial ever since. But this imaginary line along the back 75 feet has caused a problem, and I understand that this application is not the first time you've heard this issue. So what we have here as I said, there's two parcels. The easternmost parcel, you know, if you take the back 75 feet of the easternmost parcel and have it zoned R2, it's totally unbuildable because it's too small. If you take the back 75 feet of the western portion, it might technically qualify with enough square feet, but it would certainly never meet the requirement that it have frontage, on a road. In order to get to that parcel, you would have to do a driveway through a commercial space. So what we're asking here now is to just zone the back 75 feet commercial along with to make it go with the rest of the property. I could keep going, but I could, I don't know. Anyway, I view this as almost a correction to the 2005 zoning ordinance. It really doesn't make any sense for this back 75 feet to be zoned residential. So I have submitted proposed findings of fact showing that this would be in compliance with the comprehensive plan. It's in compliance with the current uses all along Route 20 in that area. It's the most desirable and certainly the most feasible use of this property.
Okay. I will now open the public hearing. Before we get started, if you feel uncomfortable speaking in public, you can submit a written letter and we will put it into the records. We would ask that you come up to the podium and sign your name and address. If we have multiple speakers, I ask that it not be repetitive, that you would speak as an addition and not the same thing. So, public hearing is open. Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? If not, I close the public hearing and open it to questions from the commission.
Madam Chair, if you remember about 2 years ago, we did a committee where, to reference I really like the term the invisible line because I think it very accurately describes what happened. We made a list of all the properties impacted by this where in some cases very clearly residential properties zone commercial in the back, in some cases commercial properties zone residential in the back, and I understand why the city's position and this commission's position has been to fix them as the owners would like them fixed. So as we get petitioners, we just keep working on that. To me, this is just another example of somebody looking to fix that and make that adjustment. I don't know if I'm allowed to call it a correction, but I understand that sentiment. So I guess that's more of just a comment to just kind of explain how we got here.
Any other questions, comments, discussion? Yes.
Was that 75 feet there maybe created to create some kind of a buffer or easement between the residential and the commercial? Is there any concern of any environmental issues between the commercial and the residential?
Well, I can't speak for what happened in 2005. I don't know what their thought was then. There's some discussion that maybe they didn't have all the GIS lines and data available that we have now. But there already is a requirement that there would be a setback from in the commercial space from any residential area, so that's already built in. And if we didn't do this, then you'd have the 75 feet of residential, and then you'd still have to do the setback. So you'd be losing another 20-25 feet of the entire back end of these properties.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? I have to agree that it is we should be fixing this and we have not. So without any frontage to get in, I mean, it's like a no-brainer to me. Any other questions? Is anybody willing to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the petitioner's request.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
It needs to be a recommendation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That we give a favorable recommendation for the petitioner's request to the City Council.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a recommendation and a second. Mr. Monroe, could you call roll?
Austin Bonta,
Yes.
Tom Cherry,
Yes.
Gina Geisers,
Yes.
Hortensio Moreno,
Yes.
Charles Thompson,
Yes.
Denise Little.
Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you. I wish things went that easily downstate.
Could you call our next order of new business?
And C0321, David and Janice Liu, Living Trust, care of Todd Lee, and Chief Coffee, Wagner Evans, 103 East Lincoln Way, Valparaiso, Indiana, requesting a change of zoning from OC office commercial to R2 low density residential for the 33.2 acres plus or minus that are included in parcels 64-05-326-007.000-016 and 64-205-204-326-001.000-016. Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Todd Leaf. I'm here on behalf of the petitioners, David and Janice Lute. Their property is two parcels, approximately 35 acres plus or minus on the south side of Lute Road. At 6135 is the home on one of the two parcels. The property is shown on the handouts that I provided prior to the commencement of tonight's hearing, Exhibit A. That's, if you will, a printout from the GIS county website that just kind of highlights the orientation of the property. And as you can see, it abuts down to the south the Menards and the commercial zoning, which is on the north side of Highway 6. This parcel was the subject of a rezoning attempt approximately 2 years ago. Our clients entered into a conditional contract to sell to a developer. They petitioned for multifamily zoning for this property. That property zone change petition was ultimately denied by the city council. So that developer left and went on their way, and my clients now are left with trying to market this property. It's currently zoned office commercial. So we're asking for a zone change or a zone map amendment, as the law calls it, to zone it to the R2 low density single family zoning district. This is a very unusual parcel. For a parcel of 35 acres, which is probably, I wouldn't say it's a small parcel, but it's not a large one either. It's somewhere in between. If you look at the next page in my handouts, Exhibit B, there are 4 other zoning classifications that touch this parcel. Very unusual. So we have commercial on the south. We have the M classification over to the west. We have R2, which is what we're asking for. So there's just a lot of different zoning classifications. So if you were trying to develop this property, you could not build a comprehensive 35-acre development without touching some zoning classification which would likely be a non-compatible two uses abutting because of that. So the R2, in our opinion, is, if you will, the safest to market. And that's what my clients would like to do, is put this back on the market and have a zoning classification that we think is most favorable to a buyer. Now that buyer may very well come back with another zoning classification. They may do a planned unit development, do something commercial on that west side, do something residential on the east side, do something commercial on the south side. Augusta Boulevard is going to go through, that's in your thoroughfare plan, to carve up, if you will, the east and west sides of that. I have no idea, and no one does, what a future developer might look at this property for. But I can tell you that I believe that the R2 low density residential is probably the best fit for the parcels that touch. To the north we have that low density residential. To the east we have the same thing. We have a church as well. So it just seems to me that that's a better extension. I know staff is concerned with some of the competing uses, the commercial on the south side, and I think any developer would come along and put in the appropriate buffer yards along there. They would have to if they wanted to market any residential lots along there. That's what a buyer would look for. Currently, the zoning classification of office has probably approximately 10 uses listed. If you take out the fire stations and government buildings, there's probably 7 uses left. Each one of them starts with the word office. Office contractor, office general, you get the idea. So it's a very limiting zoning classification, in my opinion, as to what are allowable uses in the current zoning. So it makes it very difficult to market and sell property that is going to automatically, absolutely require a zone change. So we think the R2 is a good step for the saleability of the property. Your staff has done a great service to me, and I think to you, in outlining what you're supposed to be looking at, what you're supposed to be giving reasonable regard to. The state law talks about reasonable regard to certain things. Your ordinance has a number of those. First of all is the comprehensive plan. I want to come back to that. But it talks about current conditions and character of structures and uses in each of the districts. I think the uniqueness of this property, the 4 different zoning classifications that touch it, talk about that current conditions. And we'd like to match up with the residential uses rather than extend the commercial uses that are on Highway 6 up to Lute Road. I don't think that's appropriate. Most desirable use for which the land in each of the districts is adapted. I think this is targeting unique environmental features or distinctive conditions with regard to the property. The property does not have any power lines or sand dunes or streams, creeks or water bodies at all. Topography is fairly flat, so there's nothing unique about this particular property that would drive a zoning decision, in my opinion. Conservation of property values. I think property values are dependent upon buffering competing uses and maintenance of whatever use it is. I think you can have an office complex or an office or a business park next to residential and it works very well. Screening and buffering are important. Light pollution is important. Those are all development standards that you can utilize to protect property values. But I think that the neighbors, the homes in the area would argue with me and say they'd rather have a home next to their subdivision than another business or commercial enterprise. Responsible development and growth is the last of the uses, and I think R2 fits that bill for the reasons I've stated. Back to the first point, the comprehensive plan. That's my third slide or third page. And in my looking at the land use map in your 2009 comprehensive plan, I thought that this fell within the low-density residential, which is exactly what we were asking for. Mr. Knutson challenged me. He believes it's in the office, which is consistent with the zoning. We arm wrestled and he won. So if it is in the office technology district, then his comment in the staff report I think is appropriate. We're down zoning from office to get to our low density residential. So either way, I think those points in the zoning ordinance that you're supposed to pay reasonable regard to are met with regard to this particular petition. That's all the comments that I have. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or those that come from the public. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now open the public hearing. Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? Mr. Knudsen, do we have a letter to put?
Madam Chair, we have 2 letters.
Okay, thank you.
I don't believe there are for or against. I think that some are more just inquisitive, maybe offering some thoughts as opposed to for and against. The first is an email received from a Mr. Klaus Ackerman. And this is, was sent to Mr. Knudsen on Monday, September 6th. And this is from Klaus and his wife Karen. Yes, the proposed zoning amendment is generally agreeable. However, our home and additional lot, as well as our neighbors' Lisa Lute's 2 lots, will be a small OC island among the much larger proposed R2 property. This is due to the proposal, which has R4 properties listed as accepting therefrom the zoning amendment. It would be best if these accepted therefrom properties would be included in the change to R2. And that's from Mr. Klaus and Karen Ackerman. The second letter dated September 3, 2021 was sent via email, and this is from Tyler Edwards, the real estate representative from Menards out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. This letter was sent to Mr. Knudsen. Menard Inc. Menards is in receipt of a notice regarding the rezoning meeting for the property north of the Menards retail store. While Menards would like to make it clear that it favors the growth, prosperity, and development of Portage, Menards does hold some reservations and concerns regarding the property in question being used for residential. The operation of the Menards store, like similar large retail establishments, generates a certain level of noise, traffic, and lights. Menards encourages each of you to consider these factors during your review of the pending request. In the event you deem it appropriate to approve the request, Menards would like it clearly understood that based upon our prior development in the area and our notice given in the form of this letter, no objection should be made to Menards by the city, county, the developer, or the future owners, tenants of the property in question for any of these foreseeable issues that may result from being in close proximity to an existing commercial district. Menards respectfully request that the proposal be considered with the above-mentioned concerns noticed and conditioned on the understanding by all parties that any residential development shall in no way impair the future operation of the Menards Home Improvement Store or future development of its commercial property in the area. Please include this letter as part of any official public hearing. Thank you for your time and consideration. And again, this is from Tyler Edwards, a real estate representative of Menards Inc., 5101 Menard Drive, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, 54700. And those are the 2 letters we received.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? If not, I will close the public hearing and open it to questions from the commission.
Mr. Monroe, Mr. Ackerman, which property does he own?
I believe if you look at the exhibit that has been provided by the petitioner, you'll notice if we were to extend Augusta Boulevard south, there are 2 properties that are like notched out of the blue in question.
This one here and that one.
It's right here.
Oh, okay.
It's my understanding that those are the properties they speak of.
Okay. He said that those properties are zoned OC as well? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Any questions?
It's my understanding that the thoroughfare is already set, so any development, if it's residential, it would connect Augusta the way through. Is that right?
Yeah, so the comprehensive plan that we spoke of also has a thoroughfare plan within it, and that shows Augusta connecting from Loop to the existing stub there, which would take it out to Highway 6.
Okay.
My question on that, though, would be, what are the limits as far as trucks coming from Menards going through there?
That would be up to the city.
Okay.
Is there any clarification we have already on that, as far as like what could be traffic-wise coming through if you're going from a commercial area up to the residential area on Loop?
No, there's not been a traffic study at this time. Again, Augusta Boulevard is in the thoroughfare plan. This is the last segment north. Augusta Boulevard then continues south between Lowe's and I think it's American Freight now, the former Sears Hardware, and continues through the Sterling Creek development, and it has plans and proposed to extend all the way to 700 North.
It would have to swerve a little bit, right, to actually connect, because it's not like it's a straight line between Augusta off Loot and Augusta over where Menards ends.
Yeah, that's correct. You notice the property to the south that to cite the Menards, the developer of the Augusta Center sub did move Augusta Boulevard to the west. And if you're familiar with Augusta Boulevard, it's a little bit off page to the south, that there are some wiggles in Augusta Boulevard as you go south towards 700 North.
I know that this came up in some discussion ahead of this meeting. Is it within our ability to consider a contingency about driveway access on Augusta when it comes through this property? Or how would that be like enforced if we were to?
So our thoroughfare plan, I believe, calls us out as a collector, correct? And I believe that, again, our recommendation would be that it be applied as a condition to this change of zoning. We, in other subdivisions on streets similar that were identified in the thoroughfare plan, have been working with those petitioners, those developers, to consider that in most of the times either a commercial sub or a planned unit development. Considering what Augusta will provide is a thoroughfare plan between Loop Road and ultimately 700 North, limiting commercial drives would be the staff's recommendation, and it would be our recommendation to include that in any proposal for zoning here. We would absolutely hold that as a standard in an office commercial development. But again, in an office commercial development, we probably would likely have fewer driveways. The public right-of-ways might be platted in a little different way. But in this case, we could really have single-family subdivisions loading this street every 30, 50, 80 feet. And it would be our recommendation to not allow Augusta Boulevard to be developed as that sort of thoroughfare plan between the Augusta Center sub and the road.
Mr. Monroe, when would that be appropriate to place that condition, though? I guess what I would like to have a clean record to be able to market the property. And if I have conditions, it makes it more difficult for a developer to come in and purchase that. I think that any residential developer looking at an R2 is going to recognize that with acknowledging Augusta coming forward and coming through is going to be a higher standard of thoroughfare. So it's not going to be a local road where you would have multiple curb cuts. But I think your ordinances would allow you, when that developer comes in with a subdivision, that's when you can impose that condition. But it seems odd to make that a condition of a zone change.
Staff stands by the recommendation. I don't know if we can hold a future person to that. I don't know if our thoroughfare plan is quite as specific as I would prefer it be as it relates to a collector street. As I indicated previously in my comments, it's a lot easier to regulate driveway access in a commercial sub, and it was much easier to regulate it in a planned development. I unfortunately have to disagree with council in this case. We could get an R2 developer in here, and I don't know if we would have standing to limit access to that road, because I don't believe it's clearly enough stated in the thoroughfare plan that was adopted in 2009.
Thank you for explaining that.
I do have, well, let me start another way. We often have problems when we have residential and have approved residential that is backing up to commercial. The people that are buying in there say, I don't want my home backing up to a commercial. So then we have 20, 30 couples coming in here and saying, I don't want this, when the commercial was first.
Right.
So I really think that we need to put something specific about a buffer. I don't care if it's 20 feet of trees where they can't see the commercial, but it's very difficult when they come in. We want to represent both parties, but we can't take the commercial owner's right to build what he wants.
I don't have a problem if you want to make a condition on 20 feet of landscaped buffer along the south and the commercial. I think any residential developer would build that in anyhow. I think that's perfectly fine. The condition that we talked about earlier with the road cuts and so forth, that one's harder for me because I don't envision so much what or how a subdivision would lay out with Augusta Boulevard coming through. And quite frankly, I think that developer has some play in where Augusta Boulevard would come through. It can't go straight, we know that.
Right.
But does it angle a little bit or a lot? And that's kind of up in the air. So where those driveways would come and go, I don't know, and that's why I don't like that condition. And I'll be working with staff between now and City Council. Maybe we can modify the condition a little bit to my liking. But with regard to the buffer yard, I don't have a problem with that condition one bit.
I really thought all of our subdivisions since 2008, 2009 had to have no driveway cuts on what I call a semi-major road. Once you're in the subdivision.
You wouldn't put them on Loop Road. And I think you could do the same. I think the same.
Say that again, I'm trying to picture it.
You would not have driveways on Loop Road
Correct.
from a new subdivision.
Correct.
For exactly what you suggested. So I would think that your ordinances, and I don't know, but that's one of the things I can work with staff on, but I would think that your ordinances would protect multiple driveways on Loop Road as well as on Augusta.
So I do not believe that standard is in place, and I don't think there's a place to look for it. The fact of the matter is that we don't have a standard that would prohibit a developer from loading one of those streets. Again, I would prefer that if it's there, we find it now, as opposed to negotiating it between now and the City Council meeting, because I don't see it. But again, if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to admit it. As for the buffers, the question came up about the buffers, and there's been a conversation down here. So why Menards, the Augusta Center sub, does not have a buffer yard is because it understood the adjacent use to the north would be office and commercial.
Correct.
So for those members who might question that, why didn't we buffer that? It's because those two commercial uses are of similar intensity, let's say. That's a definition or word that's used in the ordinance. That office commercial zoning district, as it lies vacant, would have been required to provide buffer yards to the residential development to the east, and would have been, I believe, even had to provide some buffers to the existing single-family homes because while the zoning is office commercial, their land use is still single-family residential. So there probably would have been some buffering and some screening, especially if those folks were not looking to change the zoning of that property or to maintain that single family. So the buffer and guard thing, again, is the staff's recommendation, is something to consider because why the buffers weren't provided by the more intense commercial uses is because this property was zoned out as commercial. Guys, and ladies and gentlemen, don't mean to call you guys. Ladies and gentlemen, the Menards north property line is a 14 to 18 foot tall wood wall. I built either on the property line or very near to. Again, is Attorney Leith represented the opening. He is representing a very complicated parcel of property with a lot of uses around it. We, the city, this commission are challenged, I think, to figure out how best to do that. I understand that we can stand and articulate that the developer would see it, but I've seen developers that don't see it.
Right.
So again, why it's staff's recommendation to be firm in a condition and recommendation to the Common Council is, again, because our experience is everything is not mutually understood or universally understood. And why we think long-term it's better to offer that as a condition now so that those future residents who may not then be protected by that developer, because we didn't talk about it now, is adamant or we run into something else. Again, it's hard to just plant a tree on the north side of an 18-foot wall and expect it to be successful. So we have some challenges associated with this. So again, that's why that second consideration or recommendation is included in the staff report.
So also there's the issue of the properties to the west, one of which is multifamily, one of which is office commercial. Is there existing rule that say that it has to be connected when this development goes in, since it's the last opportunity to connect those properties, or is it really on us to make sure with the contingency that that happens?
That one, I think, is a little more open to interpretation and future planning. This again is a tricky one. If this were developed as a 33-acre office development, it seems very natural that that would lead into an adjacent land use that ultimately has access to Willow Creek between two strip centers that are on Willow Creek just south of the Shoop's restaurant. And then again, as Attorney Leith represented, that's why this is tricky. So we thinking about the land planning in our community need to be considering this and not really restricting all this land's ability to gain access because we're closing in on it with all these different land uses. Again, if it were OC, it seems more natural. However, if this is if Planning is a single family development, from past experience, have seen developers who would want to block themselves off and turn their back to it, and now the city of Portage is left with 20 acres of multifamily zone land use that has a very complicated access, and I'm not sure that's responsible development pattern. Again, I don't know on this one, Austin, though, I don't know the definite answer to this.
Sure.
I really more identify this as a problem that comes as a result of downzoning this property from office commercial to from OC to R2.
It sounds to me that at worst, that contingency might turn out to be redundant, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's more just if it's not redundant, we want to make sure that that's covered.
Right, and with that said, and I know in the last 15 minutes we've been talking about the challenges with this. Yeah. On the flip side, it is the staff's recommendation that the zoning, there's a lot of merit to us, while we have to answer some tough questions, going down the road that this might be the best way to see this property develop. So I want to, at the end of all the negativity, point out that while we're sitting here today identifying problems, that in no way is the staff or considering this a bad proposal. It's just we see some matters within the proposal that could challenge us down the road if we don't take a moment now, while it's just on paper as a conversation further down the road.
The risk of asking, hopefully not a silly question, but when it comes to the staff's recommendation with the buffering, what is the definition of consider? That is to say, what does it mean for a future developer to consider buffering if we were to go based on that wording?
We think we're using the word consider because we don't want to tell you what to do.
Okay.
We're saying, would you please consider our staff recommendation, and if you so too wish to take it, include it in your recommendations to the county council.
Okay.
What I don't think it is just a role of arborvitae's. I think it has to be denser, where they can't even look more trees, more evergreens, but not just one row of trees. I think it has to be a true buffer for noise, lights, and to protect the people that are moving in there, because developers don't tell them they can build on this lot whenever they want, and it's going to be office commercial. They always forget to say that.
Right. Oftentimes, buffer yards have a width requirement, of course. Sometimes they will have a barrier, either a mound or a fence, and then they always have some kind of planting requirement, and it's usually a mixture, as you indicated, of large trees in a limited number, a couple of smaller trees interdispersed amongst the larger trees, and then a larger number yet of shrubs or ground cover in that 20 feet. I think you suggested 20 feet. I think that's probably a good number, 20 or 25 feet along that southern boundary here. And that's something that I think, again, any residential developer is going to want to see or do that.
And I think at one point, you were with a different client, but we spoke about a live fence line. And that's exactly what that was. A mixture of big, small shrubs, ornamental shrubs.
And there's a distinction to be made. There is screening, which is an attempt to block light, noise, and visibility. And then there's landscaping, which is just simply an attempt to green up something. I think this is the former rather than the latter. This is an attempt to block two competing uses.
Any other questions or comments?
I get to talk about the buffering along the Menards area on the south, and I'm sorry, I just don't know by memory, because I mean, it also touches what looks like, I think, the high school, baseball fields on the east side. And then we've got on the northwest side, we've got the multifamily apartments there. I would think we want at least some of that covered as well when it comes to buffering, or is it really just the commercial?
I think from the residential that's there all the way around, I mean, they know that the fields are there.
Yeah.
Would I want to live next to the fields? Yes, because I think it would be exciting. But that they know. This, they don't know, and that's where we run into serious problems.
Gotcha.
So if I could continue, why it's in here is because, again, in this condition, the ordinance does not differentiate residential as the intensities of their two uses. So as our ordinance is written right now, the adjacent multifamily to the west is not required to include a buffer yard in their development. That's why it's in this staff recommendation here. because, again, that person expects this to be office commercial, not the other way around. And then on the institutional side, the buffer yard would have been required to be provided by the institutional use if this were, again, R2. However, when Portage High School built the ball fields, this was zoned office commercial, and they did, as a result, have to build that buffer yard. So again, this petition is the one causing the world to change for the adjacent properties, and why it's the staff's recommendation that this be considered in your deliberation and recommendation ultimately to the common council.
So, help me understand staff's recommendation on where the buffering should fall. Along the south is where I would agree we need to provide a buffer where the commercial is. You're suggesting that the church and the school baseball fields, the institutional zoning, would also require a buffer?
That is where we, in the staff report, proposed to start the conversation. Yes.
Okay. I guess I would suggest that both the church and the ball fields are not incompatible to residential development. So I would suggest that we not have to screen there. The multifamily along the northwest corner, again, I don't think that two competing, I'll put that in air quotes, residential uses need to have a buffer. The open space in the southwest corner is undeveloped. So they would, if that develops, then that property would be required to do the buffer because
Right.
we were R2.
So that's why I didn't include that with my comments, because that will be the responsibility of whoever that developer is
Exactly.
on
So
that end.
I guess I only see buffering required to the Menards to the south. That's the real objectionable land use, in my opinion.
Don't we already have a tree line between that multifamily and this? I thought we already had that.
Well, there could be one that's built or one that's currently out there, but I couldn't sit here today and say that it's going to be here if that were
Right.
developed.
Right.
And as our ordinance is written, there is no buffer yard requirement. Back, I stand corrected. In the case of M, the multifamily to the west, the multifamily would be required to provide the buffer. That's in Article 6.38 landscape standards residential sites. So my apologies for that. With that said, our recommendation on the multifamily, which is well, it's already built.
Right.
It's already built. This is OC. Okay. I don't stand corrected, and I'm going to go back to agreeing with the staff.
See, and I don't see why the parcel that's zoned OC to the west should incur the expense because your parcel is going to residential.
Yes.
And that's where we get all the pushback from residents. I don't want it, I don't want it, I don't want it. Because I'm residential, I don't want OC by me.
It's not necessarily whether it's OC versus R2, it's who's developed first.
Is who?
The requirement for the buffer yard, as I understand, is essentially if this rezoning occurs and the OC is developed there in the southwest, If they're developed before the R2, my client's property, the OC would have to put in the buffer yard.
Right.
And I don't understand why that's problematic.
Well, then it's kind of a race, because we could, if not us, the city council, could rezone this R2, but then suppose the other property develops before this one develops, then it would be.
Our zoning is what triggers their need to do a buffer
Right.
yard. Just like you're asking me to do.
Not the
buffer
development,
yard.
okay, gotcha.
I'm looking for a tree line. I'm paying attention, but,
Mr. Monroe, does the landscaping standards, the buffer yard requirements, does it provide for a standard with regard to plantings and widths and so forth?
Without getting into the entire article.
Yeah.
More intense use, so if we were looking at the more intense use, shall plant an additional landscaping area determined in the approval process. Then it goes on to talk about the setbacks. An additional 10 feet of setback along each affected property line should be required if the use shall abut residential. An additional 20 feet. So each of these are different, but then it articulates that there's those additional setback requirements. And my assumption in reading this paragraph would be that this planting area, this landscape area would be developed within those added setbacks, which within those land use areas. Why I stuttered a little bit is that in this one specifically for OC, it provides that it needed to provide a 10-foot buffer to an adjacent residential use that is site development. So it would be the OC providing a buffer to the M, because that's a site development, and an additional 20 feet would be required along the lines that abut in a residential lot development, which would be the single family, and that's kind of differentiated from the zoning ordinance. It talks about the approval of the buffer planting area as part of the approval process, and there are some discussions here of what those added setbacks would be for that planting area based on the adjacent land use.
Are the setbacks in addition to the buffer?
No,
The buffer
the
is-
setbacks, I believe, are there to say, okay, between office commercial and M, it would be a 10-foot setback and there would be landscaping. In between OC and R2, it's a 20-foot setback, and that's where the buffer.
Okay, all right.
What I would propose, if you would allow me to do so, is that you trust your ordinance, that that is a development standard part of the site plan.
But the reason
I'm sorry.
The reason why I don't think we can do that is because it doesn't then run to you, it's running the other direction. It's the intents for the less. When you do R2,
I guess what I was suggesting is put it on the developer of the R2, my client's property, whoever that would come before the city to do any type of R2 development. They would have to do a buffer yard with the approval of staff, or whatever the approval is that your ordinance anticipates, all the way around.
all I'm suggesting is the ordinance doesn't anticipate it in the other direction. It anticipates the more intense use protecting the lower intensity
Yes.
use, not the other way. So the ordinance, I can't rely on the ordinance because again, that R2 developer comes in. This ordinance doesn't say property zoned R2 buffers from C3.
The way I understood your interpretation or your reading of the ordinance is that the developer proposes a buffer yard and the staff says yay or nay.
I'm reading an article that is offering the direction of the buffer yards for businesses.
Yes.
It's applicable to institution, neighborhood commercial, office commercial, the commercial use.
Not applicable to the R2?
I don't have our ordinance when I go to that section.
Then my recommendation is that the condition placed on this rezoning is that it does apply to this particular R2.
Sounds like we're in agreement. It sounds like we're in agreement. I guess the question
That way we don't have to come up with it's 10 feet or it's 15 feet or it's 50 feet. We don't have to come up with 1 tree or 10 trees. We can just simply say that when that developer puts together his landscaping plan and his subdivision plat, he has to get staff to approve the buffering.
the commission.
Fair enough, fair enough. But what that does is it gives, and this is frankly what I'm looking for, it gives some flexibility for that developer as they come forward. Because if they want to make an argument that, you know, they've got a pond next to the baseball fields, I don't think they need to put in a buffer yard. But we'll never know where a pond or the open space is going to go. So that's when they're going to say, we don't need to put a buffer yard here. We've got a 3-acre pond in that area. We're never going to know that today. So that gives them the flexibility to build that buffer yard within the confines and within the opportunities that their own plan is going to present. So I think that's a good alternative.
The zoning ordinance in the map didn't ever assume that R2 is going to be abutting C2.
Correct.
Here's what could happen. The single-family residential that backs up the Menards can build an accessory structure 3 feet from the property line.
Fence.
Building 3 foot from property line, fence, 17-foot Menards wall. This isn't the development pattern we want. I'm not sure that's responsible development. That's why staff is saying here, consider this buffer yard thing because it could happen. Again, I'm trying to lay out all the scenarios of what could happen. Again, the staff is against the proposal has a lot of merit. There are inherent problems to this because, as Attorney Lee represented at the beginning, this is complicated. There's a lot of land uses, who went first, who went second. Again, this commission, this city, did not expect the adjacent property north of the Menards wall to be R2. I think the representative from Menards was very articulate in his letter. Trying to not build future residents of the city of Portage into a challenge, this commission into a challenge. The more we can line up, and I understand that Attorney Lee wants to keep it clean and his sale clean. However, I want to put them on notice that this is what the city of Portage is asking for as we go forward. Or we can just go with office commercial.
Mr. Monroe, is it fair to say that if this property, not that there was anything wrong with it, but if that was already zoned R2 from the beginning, like this conversation would already be settled, we would know what was going to happen, or it would have been taken care of by the other?
It would have been zoned R2 because...
Oh, I know. I'm just asking, like, if it had been, like, is it fair to say that, like, we wouldn't be having this big conversation because it would have been settled by the other?
It would have been zoned R2 because the adjacent land use would have been C2.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
while it looks challenging, if you look at Exhibit A provided by the petitioner here, if you look north into the northwest, you'll see that there's the Lancer Street subdivision. You'll see that that's an office commercial development adjacent to the lots on the west side of Savannah Heights. Savannah Heights was in some cases first, other cases second. And we've had over the years some challenges between those uses, commercial adjacent to residential. And they led to some pretty serious conversations. Mr. Lou, in the past, in the past, it was a challenge. The point in the staff's recommendation is we lived some of this stuff very seriously in the past, and lighting, buffering of these adjacent uses, whether it's the representative from Menards out of Wisconsin or Mr. Lou's past experiences here in the city of Portage, that this buffer yard, and I get while it's a challenge, is there for a reason. I'm trying to protect the next Mr. Lou from the next incident with a commercial use adjacent to.
Yeah.
That's the point of the recommendation.
Sure.
We've experienced it very personally and think it's just a solid recommendation, full well understanding that it's not quite as simple as putting R2 out in the market with no conditions attached. We fully understand it. Again, just trying to make recommendations based on some past experience.
Is there precedent for contingencies being something like a buffering plan for a future developer would have to be approved by the Planning Commission? Or would that be too broad for us to give ourselves that kind of authority?
So we, in the past, our adjacent land uses to C2 is typically a lower intensity zoning district, or somebody will come in with a planned development. So in the case of like Sterling Creek Park, which is south of those, there's a planting plan there because it's a planned unit development, and we were able to handle it in that way. This case, I don't recall this commission specifically doing Austin, what you're suggesting here. And so the only way we really knew how to move forward with that would be at least to include this condition so that this commission, the council, understand that the recommendation is coming that we value this buffer. We believe it's important, but we don't have all the answers yet.
My concern is I agree with you. I just don't know how, maybe Denise might know better than I do, like how to word any buffering language to make it right, like here at this meeting, you know, like off the top of my head. So I wondered if there was a way that we could give somebody some like authority, either the staff or the commission, to handle that, but knowing it's going to be handled by somebody and knowing that we all agree that that's important.
That we can live by 5 years down the road.
Yeah. And remember 5 years down the road.
And feel comfortable where we're not stuck between residential and any kind of commercial.
So if the roles were reversed, and for the sake of trying to find some language and hustling while we're here, do you want me to go or are you advising me to stop?
Probably what I said stated in there, we're going to want to stop. So the pointed out, we don't really have these two methods, right?
So the only thing that I was going to suggest is to then look at the language that was the buffer yard planting area language for the C2. And what they would have to do in the off chance that it was adjacent to a residential lot development. So that's what I was going to throw out.
Okay.
Is that okay, Councilman? So it was the section that I was reading where the approved business land use abuts a lesser intense land use, that if it were abutting a property, if it abuts and affects a property line that is a residential lot development, the buffer yard there is 20 feet. So that would have been the standard applied to Menards if this development were, this area, I apologize, this parcel were already zoned.
Right. Right. Do we want to give staff time to correctly prepare this verbiage so that we can all read it, understand it, and come back?
We would need more guidance from the commission as to what you would like to see in the buffer.
We can write that language, Madam Chairman. We in Austin, you asked the question, why did you use the word consider? If there were a recommendation.
It was for us to consider from there.
If you would like us to move forward with specific language we would defer to you. Please advise us. We can make that language as part of the motion today. If you would like us to listen to what you have to say, consider it, come back to you, that's of course an option. But we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Right.
Sorry.
Mr. Leaf, you said exactly what kind of buffering there was. There was tall trees, smaller trees.
Sure.
I think that's our verbiage for it.
And I'm happy to work with staff and make a proposal. Remember, I mentioned there's two kinds of plantings, or
Yes.
if you will, buffers. There's one that is landscaping, which is intent is to green up, if you will, and make it look pretty and softer, not hardscape. And then there is an attempt to screen. And the plantings are much denser and have that dichotomy of size and type, tall trees, small trees, and shrubs. Along the south, I agree that that's what we should be doing. I don't necessarily agree that that's what we should be doing when we're trying to landscape the ball fields or the church. I don't think those are competing land uses. I'm not sure that you need any buffer yard in those areas. But if you do, it's certainly not nearly as dense and intense as I think it ought to be along the south.
And I'm also thinking about the OC parcel to the west that backs up to Castle Motors.
Well, that would be the responsible.
Well, we're switching it to the developer.
And I don't understand why, because if you change this to R2, then it's their responsibility to provide that 20-foot, the code's there, and you just, I don't think that's onerous for an office development to not follow the code with regard to developing according to the landscaping standards.
Because we've reduced the density or the zoning from the OC. He was next to an OC. So now he has a condition that he has to provide the screening.
I do lots of zone change amendments through many different communities, and I don't think anybody has ever said, well, wait a minute, they're going to have to now do a more intense buffer yard. I think that's just kind of what you get when you develop, especially when you're developing a non-residential business park or project. I think that's good.
I understand your point, and we can agree to disagree. I guess
Sure.
the biggest issue here is that you're sitting out there with OC right now, undeveloped, flooding this property. The OC behind you doesn't require the additional buffer yard in the code. If that OC that's undeveloped right now is not part of the petition in front of us,
Right.
if this goes from OC to R2, we have changed their property requirements. That's whether or not the commission agrees with that viewpoint or your viewpoint. That's really what we're angling back.
I don't disagree with that, but I think
If you own the OC, then OC was behind you, and then OC turned into R2, and all of a sudden you have a 20-foot buffer yard, and you had a concept plan on the shelf, you wouldn't be happy.
if I had a concept plan on the shelf,
And what we
but
don't
they
know-
don't.
But we don't know what anything is out there or not.
I understand that. If I were in the pipeline, if I was developing the property, I was working on it, I would 1,000% agree with you. But there's no evidence of that, and I suspect that it's not true. I suspect that they're sitting back.
And they may not be. All
Right.
I'm saying is we are, for
So-
lack of a better term, we're changing their development requirements because of your reasons.
So the next time the city or any city changes the landscaping standards, do you sit back and go, oh, we better grandfather everybody or shift it to somebody else because we don't want to, we don't want to do exactly what we're trying to do, and that is make it more
In all fairness to you,
favorable.
you're correct, we wouldn't do that. But the difference would be is if we went to make that change, there would be a completely different notice requirement that went out to the people affected. Yeah, but this is just.
I disagree with that, Scott. The notice requirement is there is no notice
For,
for a wholesale change. You publish it, but you're not sending out certified mails to every property owner.
Right, but whenever those wholesale changes come, and they come with a larger part of a rezone or a complete rewrite of the zoning ordinance itself, but then you do go through all of the public comment and things like that. I mean, I think we flushed out the two sides of the story, and whether they want to, where they want, and how big they want, I think we have flushed out the issue, I guess is my point.
I agree. And to your point, we're going to agree to disagree on several of these points.
And just to follow up, the reason I believe it should be the R2, because every time we have somebody coming in with commercial, hotels, strip malls, all the people in the residential are saying, I don't want commercial. If they can't see it, I think they would be less apt to come in and complain when we're trying to do something. And that's why I think it belongs there.
And
I understand your side too.
75% of my clients who would come and do an R2 development would provide that buffer yard without the standard or without the requirement. And I understand why you have to put it in there for those 25% of my clients who wouldn't put it there.
Right.
I tend to agree. I'm not too sure we really need to do it between the baseball fields and the
Yeah.
church.
I think Evelyn moved more that way, I agree.
Yeah.
It's really just a question then, I think, of this OC, and I think we all agree, of course, too, with the south. You know?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I could make a motion and we could see where that goes. If
Okay.
most of the people, you know, I just, I think we're agreeing about the 20 feet on
Okay,
this
do
stuff.
you have it written down so you know what you're saying?
I think so.
Okay.
But,
We're gonna make a motion.
You need a second.
oh, okay.
Wait,
Apologize, Madam Chair.
That's okay.
We're having a side.
I'd rather have it now than later.
I mean, that would be cool, too.
Sorry.
So again, I'm just going to propose this, and then we don't have to immediately, well, I mean, it's a motion, so it can be talked about, but I would move that we send a favorable recommendation with the recommended contingencies of future extension of Augusta will have no residential driveway access, that a future development will have the buffering of the 20 feet adjacent to the south side of the property, and that the future development will give connection to the M2 and OC zone properties to the west.
Say that last sentence again.
The future development will give connection to the, if there's another word I need besides connection, but road connection to the M2 and OC zone properties to the west.
And nothing on buffering?
I'm leaving that out just because I think that's where I'm at, but I mean, that's where I think it should probably be talked about. I'll see if somebody seconds or if we want to discuss and.
Do we have a second? Motion dies for lack of second.
So it sounds like then that what's standing out then is the issue of people then wanting the buffering along the OC and M2 on the west side, which I could repropose with that then to see if that works.
Well, don't say buffering. If you
sorry.
could use screening landscaping.
Screening landscaping.
Buffering consisting of screening landscaping. Scott, is that right? How to say that?
Yeah.
Okay. And that would be for the whole south and the west then, or do we want the 20-foot specific? Well, that would already be there, right? Yeah.
Well, I don't think we need the entire west.
The 20-foot is not there. Again, the 10 and 20 that I referenced earlier are talking about the more intense. So if we zone this R2, there are no numbers associated
Right.
with this until they are.
So you would say the 20-foot then for the south, and then the other thing for the west, the screening and the, what was your word, Denise?
Buffer consisting of screening landscaping.
Okay.
So I have 20 feet to the south, is there a number on the west?
I don't have a,
Well, we already have a
Sure.
setback, correct?
do I need to read the whole motion again or just add?
Would you- I would-
Sure thing. So I would motion that we give a favorable recommendation for the petitioner's request with the recommended contingencies that the future extension of Augusta will have no residential driveway access. Future development will have the 20-foot buffering with the screening landscaping adjacent to the south side and the west along the OC and multifamily zoning, and that the future development will give driving connection or road connection to the M2 and OC zone properties to the west. Did I miss anything?
Do we have a second? We have a second. Discussion. Does anybody have any questions about any part of the motion?
Yeah, read the west portion of the buffer.
It was the same as the, it was worded the same way as the southern portion.
So we want a 20-foot buffer on the west, the entire west?
Well, that's not what I proposed
No.
at first, but that died on the floor when I didn't have that.
He
So,
said the OC,
You'll see, and yeah.
so that would,
You said OC and multifamily.
I can retract multifamily, so I was reading my original note.
Can you explain a little more about the connection with Augusta? With,
Gina, could you speak up? I can't hear
I'm
you.
sorry, I apologize. Explain a little more regarding the connection of Augusta to the OC and M2.
If this property develops and we don't have that connection, there's going to be no way to access those in the future without like knocking something down or like.
And there's
cutting
no
through.
way that could not connect to Willow Creek?
My understanding is not currently, because there's already buildings and everything in the front. So, I mean, we gotta make sure this property is not landlocked. I think that's a part of responsible development and responsible growth.
Any other questions? We have a motion and a second. Mr. Monroe, could you call roll?
Austin Bonta,
Yes.
Tom Sherry,
Yes.
Gina Geis-Hurst,
Yes.
Hortensio Moreno,
Can I be neutral? Or just say no? I don't,
You can say no.
I'm just a little, I mean, you're talking about them putting a road between here to Willow Creek?
No, to those properties. So you've got this property that we're rezoning, and then there's these two properties here, which they have no way to get to them because that's already closed off here.
Oh, okay.
So it's important that the future development, I think, that's what I'm proposing, the future development, we need to make sure that whatever road system they create in here, there's an access into this property. If we don't have that, this property is just gonna be landlocked. There's gonna be no way to access it via a car if somebody wanted to sell it or develop it in the future. You'd have to knock down something else, buy a property adjacent to it to connect it, or get permission, or make a deal with an adjoining property. I just don't think that's responsible for us to landlock it.
But isn't it already landlocked?
In the sense that, yeah, there's no way to drive to it now, but at the same time, there's still a property next to it where if we're putting roads through there, we can connect to it so we don't have that problem going in the future. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk during the voting. But it wouldn't necessarily be a road to Willow Creek because there's no road to Willow Creek from it now.
Right.
And that part of the motion is only if required. It's there. Not
Can you repeat
100%
that?
that
I'm
it's going to
sorry.
happen.
Right.
Just
If
the-
it's necessary.
if it's necessary.
Uh-huh.
Is that in the verbiage?
My understanding of the motion is this, I heard a motion to approve or set a favorable recommendation contingent on, number one, no residential loading of Augusta Boulevard, number two, buffer screening / landscaping, a 20-foot buffer along the south and a 20-foot buffer along the west property lines, and that there be provided a road connection to the office commercial land to the west of the subject property.
Yeah, I mean, if by necessary you mean if it develops, yeah, we got to make sure that there's a connection there, because again, otherwise it's never going to be, I think, usable, sellable land if there's no way to get to it. I mean, it's going to be a challenge. I mean, any future developer wanting to use that land, they're going to, it's a new problem. They're going to have a neighborhood, so you're going to have to figure out how to develop with a neighborhood as its connector, but it's the last opportunity we have to connect it that I'm aware of. Again, unless somebody were to make a deal with, you know, the bank or the pizza place or whatever, you know. Myers, perhaps, what?
Behind Myers.
Okay, actually, we are out of discussion. We
Oh, so,
are
yeah.
on voting.
Okay.
Scott, can you give guidance here?
Oh, I think we're in voting, so continue with the roll call.
Cortese Moreno.
Yes.
Chip Thompson.
Yes.
Denise Little.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Could you call our final business?
Yes, PD 0321, DSP Crossroads, PD, Paratati, Cape Cod, Pepper, Wagner, Evans, 103 East Lincoln Way, Valparaiso, Indiana, seeking approval of a preliminary development plan for the DSP Crossroads Plan Development, 37.16 plus or minus acres, west of 5959 Coca-Cola Avenue. Attorney Lee.
Thank you. I appear before you also tonight on behalf of this petitioner as well, Dayton Street Partners. I'm joined tonight at the hearing with the principal from Dayton Street, Howard Weldon, who will help me answer any questions that you might have with regard to this petition. Again, prior to the start of tonight's hearing, I provided to you a package of 3 slides or sheets, if you will, for this case as well. As was indicated, we're seeking a PD plan development.
Can I get a copy of that?
I'll be happy to give you one when I'm done with making my presentation. Thank you. The property in question is 37 acres. It's west of Willow Creek Road. If you look at Exhibit A, you can see that the parcel is highlighted again with that GIS. Yeah, thank you, AJ. The parcel is highlighted from the GIS printout and is an assembly of 2 different parcels and several tax parcels within those 2. Coca-Cola Avenue or Street does a loop at the end of Willow Creek and parallels for a short distance I-94, which serves as the northern boundary of this property. Coca-Cola Road will be our access into this 37 acres. This PD or planned development is essentially a rezoning. A map amendment follows the same process as the earlier petition tonight. You will consider, hear the comments from the public, and make a recommendation, either favorable, unfavorable, or no recommendation to City Council, and then they will take final action. What is unique is that we're preparing our own ordinance, if you will. The current zoning, and that's the second page in my handout, is BP, business. And while in the first case we talked about how all of the different parcels around it were different, I think the point that I want to make tonight on this particular case is all of the parcels around it are the same. So this is BP on all sides. We have the most unique part of this property, I think, is the fact that it fronts on I-94 and is set off in, if you will, hidden, if you can be hidden from I-94, but from the city itself, it's tucked back in there. It's behind the Coca-Cola facility, it's behind the business park on Carlson, the cul-de-sac there on the south side, and is west of Coca-Cola as well. So it's tucked back in there and has, because of that, some unique and challenging features in and of itself. Access is a little bit limited. Coca-Cola Drive will be extended through and into the property and so forth. So as I indicated, the PD process requires us to put together a concept plan, how we're going to develop the property, how we think we're going to develop the property, but more importantly, we draft an ordinance. And the ordinance is a little bit meaty, it's 50 pages, and its intent is frankly to replace your zoning ordinance, which is why it's so important that it has to be detailed as it is. The process requires a sketch plan first. We did that. Your staff issued a report on June 7th that indicated that the concept plan, the sketch plan at that point, met the intent of the PD overlay in your zoning code. So that brings us then to the hearing tonight at the Planning Commission, and as I indicated, it follows from there the process like a zone map amendment where City Council will take final action. The concept plan is the third and final of the pages that I provided to you in the handout. That's Exhibit C in my handout. It's also Exhibit C in the PD ordinance. You can see that we have 3 different separate and distinct buildings on the 37 acres. We have an existing wetland on the far west side, which is intended to be and anticipated to be preserved. We've got some detention areas throughout. But whatever we do, however we develop it, we're going to always have to meet not only the PD code, but the stormwater management. The city engineer is going to have to approve when we get to civil engineering, all of the design of the site, but most importantly, the stormwater as well. While we show 3 separate and distinct buildings, it is the intent for Dayton Street to own the entire 37 acres and lease the buildings or the space in the buildings. That all remains to be seen as to how the market comes. There is always the possibility that a purchaser wants to buy their building, at which point we would have to subdivide. The PD ordinance provides that it is our intent to own it, but if we do subdivide it, we simply have to follow the city's zoning and subdivision processes. So again, we would have to follow all of those requirements. So the concept plan is important, but I want to be crystal clear that it is not what is likely going to be built. It will change, it will be modified, and it will be done according to what the market drives. But the real critical part of the request tonight is the ordinance itself, the words. Just like any other developer would come to the city and ask for a site plan to approve for a commercial building or an office building, they would be required to do so and would have your zoning ordinance to comply with. We just simply have another layer, and that's the PD ordinance. I don't want to go through the 50 pages. There's just too much here to do a page turn. So I'm just simply going to leave it at that. Howard and I are happy to answer any questions with regard to this. One other point is the Board of Zoning Appeals has a pending case on this very project. It's very unusual. The PD process, the reason why we've chosen to do it is it gives us the most flexibility, because we kind of get to move things around a little bit, and we work with staff quite a bit on this ordinance and so forth. Your ordinance has a set of what's referred to as prerequisite standards. Oftentimes, communities in their PD or PUD ordinances have a set of standards that say, we don't want to do a 3-acre PUD. Yours ordinance says 10 acres. Very common, 5 acres, 10 acres, or sometimes even more. So that's a pretty standard requirement. But your ordinance goes on to establish some what I consider development standards, which are oftentimes what are the very things that developers and communities, such as the city, look for in the flexibility. So with regard to these 5, 6, or 7 prerequisite standards, some of those are really development standards, and it kind of runs in the face, in my opinion, of what the flexibility of a PD requirement is. Nonetheless, they exist, so we're going to have to get variances for 2 of those. Lot coverage, because we're have more impervious surface than your ordinance allows in the PD standards, and building height. We want to go vertical because we have pretty much a constrained site. So we're going to go a little taller, and hopefully I think that's an attractive part, particularly in the I-94 corridor. I think taller buildings along a very wide right-of-way I-94 fits very comfortably. So I just wanted to alert you that we will be on the 27th at the BZA asking for relief from those 2 standards. With that, Howard and I are happy to answer any questions that you might have or those that come from the public.
You're under public hearing, so I will now open the public hearing. Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? And if you would state your name, sign in, and write down your address.
My name is Chris Scott. I own the property just south of that proposed development. I'm not necessarily against it. I would be more pro for it. Biggest problem I have with it is we have a lot of water runoff coming off Route 20, coming down Douglas Drive. 20 minutes after a hard rain, it's like a river coming down through there. Is there any contingencies to keep the water flowing out toward the interstate or wherever it goes after it gets past me? Because I'm down at the end of the block. And, as we've had problems in the past, you guys managed to get us for our water runoff, pay dearly for that. I just want to make sure that we're not drowning down there. Now, in between, at the bottom here, you'll find right there by building 2, there's a little partial there, a little easement. I'd like to see that vacated if we're not going to put a road in there, if that's possible.
Okay, could you be more specific?
If you'll look at
Building 2.
Building 2, go to the south property line. You'll see
That-
2 little black lines there. That's an easement. And it's not very big. It's basically made for a road that should have went through there or was proposed many years to, but I'm okay if it doesn't. It's not a big deal. The biggest issue is the water runoff. You know, is the elevation going to stay the same to where it continues to go forward? Will there be a retention pond here? Because there doesn't look like there's been proposed for one, but that's fine, just as long as I'm not sitting down there with a water problem. And that's all my main concern is. Outside of that, I wish you guys all the luck in the world. You know, there's no
And we'll
problem.
have all of your questions answered for you.
Okay, and can I get a copy of your ordinance change?
I don't have an extra copy, but if you give me an email, I'll email it to you as well.
Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? If not, I will close the public hearing. And Attorney Leith, I'm sure you have, first is the runoff.
So, as I indicated, we have a concept plan. You're just trying to lighten your load for the trip home. That's all you're trying to do. So, we have a concept plan. And as I indicated, and as the ordinance states, whatever we come in for permitting, we have to do the things that any developer would do if they were building any building, and provide for stormwater management as one of those. We have that wetland there on the west. We're going to have to provide either permitting or avoidance of that, certainly protection if we do avoid it for water quality issues. So all of those things are not eliminated. They're simply highlighted in the PD ordinance. And the approval process for construction documents is set forth in the PD ordinance. It tells you and us what we have to do in the two-step process. There is a plan review process, and then there's construction documents. And the construction documents are going to be civil engineered to manage stormwater. I will go back to the concept plan because the concept plan is not made in a vacuum. The designers who look at this know the topography of the ground. And we are showing detention along the north, which tells me that the designers already know that that's the way or the direction that the water runs is to the north. So they're going to run it to the north, they're going to capture it, and then that's the metered release continuing to the north, as the gentleman indicated, I-94. So I think that all makes sense and is consistent with what I'm hearing.
That was just my main concern, was the
Right.
water. Because it's pretty bad. It has been, ever since I've been down there for 20 plus years. It's been that way for,
Okay, and also another point, city engineers would also be able to review this with the PUD in place? What's your opinion?
Of the development?
No, of taking care of the water runoff. Have you,
Well, let me jump in. Chip's not the stormwater engineer.
okay,
Chip is the city engineer serving on this board. He serves the department in the capacity of municipal engineering. If you go to the PD document, I think it's probably in the detention section. There's a discussion of stormwater. It talks about all applicable permits. So when we get to the point where the stormwater design for the development is completed, that will be reviewed by the utility department's consultant.
okay.
And then their recommendation would come to us, very similar to how we're looking at subdivisions now.
Yes. So not only would they design, then the city stormwater would also go back and look at that.
Well, I'm satisfied with it. I
Okay.
just wanted to make my concern known
Okay.
because it is a problem.
Yes.
I mean, I had to do things to make sure that it's all going to the north.
And we really thank you for that.
Okay, that's fine, but if we can get that vacated, that road vacated out.
Okay. I'm going to look to staff or council on that.
That is not the purview of this board.
Okay.
That matter, the gentleman's request would be taken up at the Board of Public Works and Safety for consideration. If the Plan Commission would like to make that recommendation, maybe not directly related to the petition specifically, because it isn't really part of this application.
It looks to me like that road or whatever easement, whatever it is, isn't even on this property.
Correct.
No, it's not.
Yes.
Correct.
My concern
Okay,
is the elevation of the property. That's
right.
all I'm worried about.
Right, and I understand.
So if that is something that, listening to the gentleman's comments, if that's something the Plan Commission would say, hey, could you take a look
Right.
into that, be more than happy to do that, or setting that aside, Mr. Scott, if that's something you would like to consider, maybe you and I can get together, we can just take that matter directly to the Board of Public Works and Safety, because that request isn't, that request isn't this board's purview.
Okay, sir, the public hearing's closed, so what I'm going to have to do is have you meet with
Well, that's fine.
Mr. Monroe, and I know that he will look at all of your concerns.
That's all I'm concerned with,
Okay.
is Maverick's elevation moved up about 3 foot. And if they do that over there, we're gonna have a problem.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
Questions to the commission? Does anybody have any questions about the PUD? Understanding what a PUD is?
Can you explain for those online what a PUD is?
Okay. So a PUD is that they can make their own decisions in the 38 parcels, 38 acres. It has to run along the city lines, but every time there's a question, they don't have to come back to the city. They're writing their own ordinance. The city has to approve the PUD before they can move forward with that. And I'm sure that staff went through it.
We did. And I apologize on behalf of Kurt and myself and the department for not getting a staff report. We were waiting for some additional information from the Redevelopment Commission that we were unable to secure in time for this meeting, but I am in a position to report verbally. The petitioner is acting under Article 7, Planned Developments. That is spelled out in the ordinance that was previously distributed to the members of the commission. The way that this ordinance reads is that the director of the department is responsible for authoring this ordinance. How that was addressed here is we're several planned developments in here in the city of Portage, and as we've learned and developed the template that you see here, we pass that information along to Attorney Lee, the petitioner, his team, and they developed or massaged the language so that it would be appropriate to their development that they're proposing before us this evening. A couple weeks back, then we sat down, we went through and read the ordinance as proposed in its entirety. They subsequently provided both a red line version based on the comments that we had during the discussion, and I believe the commission members have a clean version of the plan development ordinance. So there are two things that you're considering this evening. You're considering the plan development ordinance, which is the document, the 50-page document that Attorney Leith is referencing here. And then there is an action on a recommendation of a plan development overlay that would overlay on the property, the base zoning property being BP Business Park, I believe is correct. Yes. So we are, that is where we are today in terms of process. And so that is what we're considering. Again, the more information about plan developments are provided or is provided in Article 7 of the zoning ordinance. If you have any questions specifically about why we're here, why we're able to do this. I guess what I would add is the developer a number of months ago approached the city of Portage about this property and about their proposed concept. And after considering the plan, the BP, the underlying, or the zoning district as it sits today, versus what they were proposing to do, that they seem to fit very nicely into a plan development, and then having that overlay. And I believe Attorney Leith in his opening remarks made reference to that letter that staff reviewed the concept plan several months ago. The staff has been working with the petitioner, Attorney Leith, and his team for some time now, and feel very good about the document that you have before you. This what you see here is very consistent with how the plan development ordinances read in other parts of our community. One thing I would like to ask, and I believe this is the only thing I caught, and again, Attorney Leith, I apologize, members of the commission, specifically Counselor, to Article 5, approval procedures on page 24. I know you and I, when we met, we talked a lot about if approvals were to fall to the director, or if they were to fall to the Plan Commission. And I just want to double check with the authority offered in 5-A. This would be whether it's a site plan or plat. Were we thinking that we wanted to bring that to the Plan Commission, or were you wanting to do like a lot of the other plan developments and have that run to the director in the department?
Well, I had originally suggested that it run to the director, but I thought that you had asked us to change it to Plan Commission, which I did.
I think we might have just missed each other in the night. The area that you struck subsequently, that you struck including the final development plan.
Okay.
That's the strike. So I agree with that. I can't give authority to the final development plan.
Okay.
That would be the Plan Commission. That's a substantive. So I think your notes are correct. I think we were just caught up in this paragraph.
Okay.
As it was presented.
So you think that the change from director to Plan Commission should be reversed back to director?
In that paragraph.
Yeah. Okay.
And I agree with you striking the third line that starts with including.
Understood.
And then I believe that we were on the same page, everybody here. When we get to page 27, you'll see that in that case, when the developer is contemplating variances, that is where I think we were then on the same page there. That the variances, if it's spelled out in here, staff does it. If it required a variance, the staff's recommendation to the development team was that then comes back to this body, and so you'll see that change there. So I think we might have just missed a little bit, but I just wanted to make that clarification. Other than that, I think the document reads pretty clean. So, okay, pause. Why you didn't get a staff report. The developer, Howard, nice to see you again, very early on in the process, identified some challenges to accessing the site specifically the intersection of Willow Creek and Coca-Cola. That's a very difficult corner to navigate and turn. The petitioner subsequently had an engineering team look at it, and the intersection won't work for the development. It needs to be modified. The petitioner has requested of the redevelopment commission participation using tax increment finance revenues secured through the allocation area to make some of the changes at that intersection. The developer also has some additional requests of the commission that are out in conversation right now. I was hoping over the course of the last couple of days to have a better direction for you as it relates specifically to that matter. I don't. What I can report is that the redevelopment commission is in ongoing conversation with the developer as it relates to that matter. And I believe that we will find a resolution. I'm comfortable saying that. And I don't have anything else that to report, but that was the big thing on the staff report. It was a pretty significant thing hanging out there, and prior to this meeting, I was unable to get that, or I was unable to get that typed up and ready to deliver. So I apologize for the verbal report, and we'd be more than happy to put this down on paper, and, get a staff report out subsequent to the meeting so we can codify what's been said here tonight.
Mr. Monroe, when it comes to that intersection and the redevelopment work, does that impact the ability for this to get going? So, I mean, we're making the recommendation that goes to the city council next. If they approve, could this development start before the intersection situation's figured out, or does one have to happen?
I believe that for a successful development, they need to be done in concert. At a minimum, there needs to be the surety that it's going to be done, and I think depending on how the redevelopment commission participates, I don't think I wouldn't be able to recommend to the redevelopment commission if they were the sponsor of a project to move forward on a project until they're moving forward as a developer on the project. So there's a timing thing that's associated. I don't believe that the lack of a determination tonight impacts this because, as Attorney Leith represented, they need to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals later this month. They'll be before the Common Council in October if all goes accordingly, and we'll be back to this body in final development plan subsequent to the Common Council's possible approval. So there are several months of approvals that need to happen that I think, because of that, I believe we will have the time to answer this specific question.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. And then when you mentioned the part that needed to be struck, when it came to the one thing that got missed, which as somebody at the DRC meeting, you did a great job going through all of that, just if I can say that to the board, but can that just be, is that already fixed, or do we need to put that in, like our wording with the recommendation?
Well, what I would ask is if the commission would like to make a favorable recommendation to the city council on this, that I would again draw your attention to page 25, Article 5, Section 5A, Authority. In the first sentence, strike Planning Commission and replace with Director.
Was it the only strike on that?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we had a really good, thorough meeting. We did, and based on our notes, their red line, everything that was discussed, I believe, unfortunately, in that, I think, Tom, we were just we were just a little bit off in terms of the comments related to that paragraph.
think.
I was all wrong. You were 100% right.
We were equally off by a little bit.
If I only made one mistake, out of 5 pages of notes from that meeting, I think I did pretty good.
Any other questions or concerns?
Is there a plan to extend Coca-Cola all the way across the north property line? There's an existing billboard easement that is currently in the way.
So we're going quite a bit towards that. The answer to the question is we are extending Coca-Cola. I would say that we're not extending it all the way to our west property line, but certainly all the way to service all of our property.
But currently, the billboard easement impedes the extension.
It's not, Coca-Cola isn't going anywhere until that billboard is removed. Exactly right.
Okay, and I mean, it looks like on your plan you have a proposed relocation spot.
Right.
I just didn't want the city to be stuck with a right-of-way that dead ends into a sign.
Well, we're not there yet. Again, as we make our way to final development plan, engineer drawings, all that, we're in step 2 of what is really a 4-step sort of review process. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so we will be working on a couple things. Mr. Thompson, you're right, exactly. That's something that we're going to have to resolve between now and construction documents for
If there's no other questions or comments, may I have a motion?
I'll motion that we give a favorable recommendation for the petitioner's request contingent on, make sure I get this right, Article 5, Section 5A, being switched from replacing the Plan Commission with Director.
On page 25.
Or page 25.
Do we have a second?
If I could,
One moment, go ahead.
The second, so it's a motion to send a favorable recommendation on the PD ordinance, and then would you kindly add the PD overlay zoning?
Yes.
I had a motion.
I'll second that. Want to make sure we are done.
We have a motion and a second. Could you call roll?
Yes. Austin Bonta?
Yes.
Tom Sherry?
Yes.
Gina Geisers?
Yes.
Hortensia Moreno?
Yes.
Charles Thompson?
Yes.
Denise Little?
Yes. Congratulations.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I have 2 questions. City Council is what date, or do we know? If you don't have to find it, can you just let me know? October something, yeah.
October 5th is the next one.
October 5th?
6:30 p.m. Is that
Correct.
Okay.
Very good. That was my first question. My second isn't so much a question, but a comment. Your staff, Mr. Monroe, Mr. Knudsen, are excellent. I work with them all the time. As you know, I appear here often. But when we do a PD ordinance, there's a lot of heavy lifting. And they've been excellent to work with, and I just want to call them out for that. And I appreciate their help all the time through this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to hear.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Good. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Meeting adjourned.